she wanted to go to this lecture, and so she thought she could interest me in going. She said, "Do you know what acoustics is?" And I said, "Yes, it's science of sound." And she said, "Would you be interested in going to a lecture on acoustics at the music school at the university, at the, that is to say, the College of Wesleyan?" And I said, yes, I would like that very much. And so she took me, and we went. And it turned out to be a lecture about the influence of Helmholtz and his theories about sound and how it works on Claude Debussy, and how the style of Impressionism was largely founded on a kind of harmony that was brand new. Debussy used chords that were based on the overtone series, and while he was not tuning them as the overtone series is actually tuned, that led to a discussion that was about what it would be if it really were tuned that way. Then he got out a monochord and began to demonstrate what the Greeks had discovered on the monochord about the relations between proportions of string lengths and pitches that sound harmonious together. And that is what, if you apply it to the scale, what is traditionally called just intonation. So he presented an idea without using these words that I call later extended just intonation. In other words, just intonation, but using the higher partials of the overtone series. And eventually I discovered Harry Partch's book, Genesis of a Music, and I wanted to, I suddenly realized that that was the application of Helmholtz to music. His way of building instruments, his way of tuning them, his whole idea was that. And so I felt cheated almost that somebody had already done what I was planning to do, but not in the same way. And eventually I wrote to him. I wrote to the University of Wisconsin Press, and the letter that I wrote was a fan letter about his book. And they gave it to the woman who had edited the book, and she sent it to him. He was then, after that, living in California. And I corresponded with him, and it was very apropos for him. He needed somebody in his studio to act as gopher, and a little better than that, but not much. He said, what instruments do you play? And I said, I play the trombone. He said, well, we don't have a trombone. But he said, maybe I can get one, and that might be useful. But he said, are you a keyboard player? And I said, I play the piano a little bit. And he said, good, you can play my chromelodeon organ. And he said, you'll have to learn how to pump it and play at the same time. Have you ever done that? And I said, no, I've never played an organ. And so he showed me how to do that. And then he said, I'd like you to learn how to play some of these instruments, but let's start with your tuning them every day. Because he checked me out whether I could do that, and I could.
Ben has what they call absolute pitch. Is that the word? Perfect pitch. Now, on the 12-tone scale, I have it if I am not challenged about it. The minute I'm challenged, then I don't know. Ben has it whether he's self-conscious or not. But now having absolute pitch, perfect pitch, with my scale, which is at least 43 tones and sometimes more to the octave, that's quite another matter. I had it in those years. But we were walking out the door of this smithy. I converted the smithy into a home up in the North Coast. The back door, I reconstructed the door because it was in terrible shape. But I never saw this piece of iron that was above there, on the ledge above the door. And I slammed the door. It was a Dutch door, you know, 2 pieces. And I slammed the door. We were both walking out, and this iron fell down. And it made a distinct tone. And Ben said, "Oh, 11/9." He had been there maybe 2 weeks at the time. And I just laughed. And then I thought, you know, that really does sound like an 11/9. I went back inside and I played it, and it was. What an incredible man.
I was listening to a recording that you and Harry Partch made when you were living with him and working as his apprentice in Walala, California, in I guess 1949.
Yeah.
49, 50, somewhere around that.
Right.
And this was a recording of Johann Krieger.
Oh yeah.
And the Minuet, I believe.
Uh-huh.
And can you talk a little bit about this and how y'all came to recording that?
It was an assignment, believe it or not. Harry was out to prove to me that if I tried to adapt the tuning of early music, that is music composed some centuries ago, but within the European tradition of writing music.
Which that was like a 17th century?
Yes, I think it was 17th. And if I went back to that and tried to use the tunings that were used then, which was what I was interested in, asking him about at least, that I would get bad results. And I said, why? And he said, well, you take this and set it to music and use your just intonation and try to do it the way you told me, and we'll see what happens. So I did that, and I discovered that I was going to be dropping by a syntonic comma fairly often. But I figured out a way to get around that by using oblique connections between one note of one chord and another note of the next chord, and connecting the chords in such a way as to bypass that problem. And I did not set the entire piece, but I brought him what I had done at the end of the time that he gave me to do it. And
that's the part you recorded?
Yes. It bypassed the comma. I can't remember it without having the score to look at the details, exactly the way it was done. But it is the technique that I've used ever since, to make it tonal, but to bypass the problem of having notes that don't belong well to the chord, that sound dissonant in the chord, that don't fit. And push that syntonic comma, which is a 21 cent, just about 21 cents, out of tune note that is supposedly a D, let's say, but it's the wrong D. And it doesn't sound right, but it's not far enough off that you feel it's not D. You know, it does sound like the right note, but the wrong tuning. And what you can do is to go ahead and let that happen and then come back later. In other words, you get off a little bit and come back. The music, so to speak, sags if you're going flat, or it rises a little in pitch, drops back. it's very hard to make it rise.
So what he meant to show you as kind of a roadblock to your...
To prove to me that there was no future in doing it that way. But it didn't prove that. It proved that it was a much more complicated and interesting problem than I had figured. But that didn't stop me. It made me more interested than ever.
It made you more interested in it. And were you pleased with the results?
No, but I wasn't so displeased that when Harry wanted to use that on the recording, I said, okay, go ahead. It's an example of what I was doing at the time. And the only other example that we had was one that I did in collaboration with him, which was the music for The Wooden Bird.